Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Kuf Chaf, Yevamos 120, and we're going to start on the bottom of Kuf Yud Tes Amabeis at the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says, Tana Lazu Eidim Ubanim Lazu Lo Eidim Lo Banim Shtem Mutaros. That if there are two women each married to two brothers, so there the Mishnah calls them Yevamos to each other, meaning they could eventually become co-wives. But right now they're not. But then one says they have witnesses that her husband died, and she also has sons. So therefore, since she has children, she doesn't fall to Yibam. And since she has witnesses that her husband died, her Yevama is not relying on her testimony. So therefore, Shtei Mutaros, both of them are going to be allowed. One can do Yibam, one can marry anybody because she has children, and the other one can marry anybody because of the idea that the Yevama has witnesses, so she's not relying on her testimony that her husband has died. But both of them come forth with the claim that their husband died, and they can both remarry. So now we have the next topic. It's based upon the statement of our Mishnah that Nisyamu Umeisu Hayavamin Asur Nase. So that the Mishnah said that, let's say go back to our original case of the Mishnah, that if there are two Yevamos that come and testify that their husband has died, now we don't allow them to remarry because they're remarrying. We don't allow them to do Yibam. It's all based upon their Yevama's testimony, and you can't remarry. You can't trust your Yevama's testimony because maybe she's trying to mess you up. But let's say there were 4 brothers in the scenario and they married the other 2 single brothers. So therefore, they're not relying on the testimony that her husband's brother has died. So under those circumstances, but then after the Yevamin die, they're prohibited to remarry again. Again, what's our case? If there are 2 women who are Yevamos, one says, my husband has died, and the other one says, my husband has died. So each one is not going to be allowed to remarry somebody from the marketplace, because there's the concern that we believe her that her own husband has died, but we can't believe her Yevama to say vis-a-vis the co-wife that the other brother has died, so to allow her to marry to the marketplace. But if there are 2 other brothers who are alive, they can marry them. And so they do Yibam with them. But once those 2 brothers die, those are the single brothers, once they die, so then the Tanakh Tama says, well, we go back to status quo ante, and they're not allowed to get married to anybody else in the marketplace because maybe the other brothers are still alive. So whereas Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Elazar says, no, since they're allowed to marry the Yevamim, they became allowed to marry once, we're now going to say they're allowed to marry another person. So Rava asked the following question. My time at Rabbi Elazar, what's the reasoning for Rabbi Elazar? He says, that once they're allowed to marry others, they're allowed to marry, once they marry the Yevamim, they're allowed to marry other people. Is the reasoning because what's the reason why Rabbi Elazar allows her to marry other people? It's because he says that we actually really believe the co-wife's testimony. And so therefore, we just trust it. And so therefore, if the co-wife says my husband has died, we believe her, and therefore there's no yavam to do even with her, and she can marry the marketplace. Oh, Dilmar, maybe the reason why we believe her is mishum dehila mekalko nafsha, because she wouldn't mess up her own self. And since the co-wife got married, so it's clear that her husband's not alive, and so therefore the yavama could believe it as well. So the Gemara says, well, is there a distinction? Is there a difference between these 2 cases? Gemara explains, there is a difference on the top of 128 when Sube, but Sarah Mekmei Dida. Let's say, can we marry off her co-wife before she herself gets married? Now, if you say a co-wife is allowed to testify for a friend, even though Yevama doesn't get married, we can allow the co-wife to get married. But if you want to say that she's not going to mess herself up, then only insav min sambinama with tzara, ilo insav wo min sambinama. Only if she gets married will we say the co-wife can get married as well. But if she doesn't get married, then we can't say the Yevama can get married. So Gemara says, how do we conclude this? So Gemara explains, Tashmala. Let's cite our Mishnah. The Rebbe Lazar says, "Whole the Huchul Yevamin, Huchul Kol Adam." Since once she married the Yevamin, now she's going to be permitted to marry anybody. That's the case of our Mishnah. Now we have Bishlama the Hilo Makako and Nafsha. If you want to say this, that the logic between why we are allowing her to marry anybody according to Rebbe Lazar is because she's not going to mess herself up, and once she got married, therefore she's allowed to marry other people. That makes sense to read this lesson of the Mishnah. That once she got married, she can marry other people because she showed by her marrying somebody else that she's not lying, because otherwise she'd mess herself up. And therefore now they can all get married to the marketplace. But if you say it's because a co-wife, they'll testify about their other co-wife. Well, then Afagav the wins of Nami. So then what does it matter if they get married? Even if they didn't get married, should be allowed to get married to the marketplace. Time of the Rebbe Lazar, Misham the Insav, who V'lo and Navsha. So we see from here the reasoning for Rebbe Lazar is only because she got married or she married him, and so therefore she wouldn't mess herself up. And that's why in this case, in general, he says that's when a co-wife can get married on the basis of the testimony that a co-wife, once the first co-wife got married to somebody else. Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily the case. Rebbe Lazar with different Kama. It could be Rebbe Lazar just responding to the Tanakama. He says, he says, according to me, a co-wife could testify about her friend. That's what I say. I would say anyways she could testify. Even though the one co-wife didn't get married, the other co-wife can rely on her testimony and get married. But according to you, Rabbanan Odui Mias, at least admit to me in this case, that where one co-wife got married, and so if the other one is going to rely on her testimony, in this case it would be okay, because by the first co-wife getting married, it shows that her husband's really dead. Otherwise, she's messing herself up. So you should at least admit to me in that case that you can rely on the testimony of the co-wife. Because she's not going to mess herself up. And the Rabbanan responded, no, even in that case, we're not going to rely on her. Because we have a concept, Thomas Nafshi pushed him. This is the concept we already cited a couple of days ago, that she says she has so much sinah, so much hatred for the co-wife. She says, I don't care if I get messed up, I want you to get messed up too. Like Samson said, let my soul die with the Philistines. It's a mission of hurting yourself if it also hurts other people. So Thomas Nafshi and push him with the kavda. So Tashma. So again, we're trying to say what's Rebbe Lazar's svara. So there was a woman. She went with her husband overseas. This was the case that we had in the Mishnah. A woman went overseas with her husband. And she comes back and she says, "My husband is dead." She can get married and she takes her ksuba on the basis of her own testimony. The co-wife is prohibited because the co-wife, going to Tanakama, can't rely upon her co-wife's testimony because maybe she's trying to mess her up. Whereas Rebbe Lazar says, so Rebbe Lazar says, so since she is allowed, therefore the tzarasa is also allowed, and she can rely on it. So we see from here that Rebbe Lazar allows the co-wife to get married on the basis of her testimony, even before the first co-wife got married herself. So we see that's the svara. The svara is that a co-wife could testify about the other person. The says, no, let's amend that text. Ema, read it. Hol v'hutra v'nises. No, because she was allowed and she got married, therefore the co-wife can get married. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, okay, but why do we have to say on the basis of this testimony that the co-wife can get married, but we have another thing to worry about. Maybe when the first co-wife comes back and says, my husband's dead, so then we're saying, wait for her to get married, and that's proof that she's not lying. Dilma Bagita Asa, maybe she had a get, and that's why she's able to get married, because she got divorced, but her husband's really not dead, and now she's messing up the co-wife. Maybe she just wants to mess up this co-wife who she hates. Mar says, yeah, that's fine. If she had gotten married to a Jew, that would make sense. That would say, okay, clearly her it's possible that she'd been divorced, and we can't rely upon that testimony even for the co-wife, even if she got married. But the Insivel Cohen, she got married to a Cohen, and so therefore it's clear that she hadn't been divorced. It must be that her husband had died. So that's the indication. So the Gemara says, so now up to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, we really didn't come to a conclusion on what's the svara for Rebbe Lazar. Is it based upon the marriage, or is it based upon the fact that a co-wife can always testify about a co-wife? The Gemara really didn't prove either way. Anyway, the next Mishnah says, Ema Eden Ela parts of Panim. Imachotem. You're only allowed to testify that a husband is dead if he has his full face with the nose. Rabbeinu Tam right away says that's only in a situation where there's only the face. But if you have the whole body with the face, then if you have the whole body, you don't even need the forehead and the nose. That's what Rabbeinu Tam says. But it seems to be against the parashas of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says even though you have signs on the body, it's not sufficient. You need to see the full face with the forehead. And even though you have signs on the body and the clothing, it's not enough. You can only testify that he's dead if you actually see him dead. Almost dead doesn't count. Even if you saw him like his body chopped up, like amputated parts, or if he's on a cross, like he's dying, he's being crucified. Even if you see an animal eating from him, you can only testify also if you find the body within 3 days of its death, when you come to identify the body. We'll call Adam, we'll call Shos, we'll call Adam, we'll call Makom, we'll call Shos Shavin. So Yehuda ben Baba says, everybody's different. Everybody decomposes. There are some people that they decompose quicker, Rashi says, like an obese person. There are some people that the sun decomposes them quicker. And there are some people, and there's sometimes a year where it's the summer, and therefore also the decomposition is quicker. So Yehuda ben Baba says it all depends. Well, parts of panim. Let's say you have the forehead but not the face, or the parts of panim well padechas, so the face and not the forehead. You don't testify unless you see both of those things: the forehead, the face, with the nose. What's the verse for this? Okay, so there's a verse for this, and the Gemara is going to cite the verse from Isaiah. It says, the recognition of their face testified on their behalf. So there's this Abba Bar Marta. So maybe there was we know coming up on the 9 days, where we say Marta, where we talk in Gemara Gittin about the very wealthy woman, Marta Bas Baitus. So maybe this is her son, Abba Bar Marta. To have Abba Bar Yumi, to have a maske Beit Reish Galusa Zuze. The Reish Galusa. The problem is that he seems to be in Babylon. So it's the Reish Galusa where Marta was in Eretz Yisrael. But anyway, so what happened was the Reish Galusa was pressing him for money. I see Kira. He wasn't ready to pay them yet. So what did he do? He took some wax, Davak Babavai. So he put it on his clothing, Davak Bapusa. He put it on his face, and Chalaf Kamaya, when he disguised himself by changing the way his forehead appears, and he passed in front of them below Bishgarua, and they didn't recognize him, so they didn't get the money. Okay, so even though we have signs, the simon is a sign, even though we have signs on his body, it's not sufficient, or on his clothing, it's not sufficient to rely upon. Gemara says, this teach us the simanim, that signs are lav d'oraisa, they're not biblical. Signs are not biblical. There are many. Is this really the case? Matzo kashor b'kis. Let's say we have a case about a get. Let's say you found a person brought a get. We know a get is a biblical law, and you find the get tied up with a kiss or arniki, with different types of wallets, with tabas or with your ring, or shamatza ben kelev, or you find the get amongst his clothing. I feel as mamaruba, even much later, kosher. It's going to be acceptable. So you mean you identify it on the basis of the signs, and then it's identical. So we see that signs are sufficient. So Amar Abaye Lokasha, Harabu Azar Ben Ma'avai harabanan. So he says one is Rabbi Elazar ben Ma'avai, and one is the Rabbanan. This is another dispute whether you can rely upon the signs of clothing. The Tanya Ema Idina Shuma. It's because we learned in the Brisa, you're not allowed to testify, identify a person on the basis of a mole or a wart that's on his body. Whereas Rabbi Elazar ben Avai says, Me'idin, you can. Okay, what's the source for this distinction? What's the source for this distinction? The source of this distinction is Marasavar Siman Diraisa, Marasavar Siman Dirabanan. Because it must be that one is in the position that these signs are biblical, and one must be as the signs are rabbinic. So the one who says that the signs are biblical would allow the woman to remarry on the basis of the word. The one who says they're not wouldn't. So we see from here that's the dispute of whether or not we can rely upon the signs. Gemara says no. I'm a Rava Koi Alma Simon Diraisa. Everybody says the signs are biblical. Everybody says that. Here they're arguing about whether or not a shuma, a wart, is it really such a good sign? Or maybe we'll say that somebody who's of the same mazel, some of the same sign as this person is going to have the same wart. Mar Savar Shuma Matsuya ben Gil. One says it's found amongst other people of the same sign, and so therefore it's not a good indication, not a good simon. No, the word is unique, and so therefore it will be a good sign. Alternatively, they're arguing about whether or not a wart changes appearance after the death. One says the wart changes after death, and so therefore it's not a good sign. The other one says it doesn't change after death, and therefore it's a good sign. Alternatively, everybody says signs are rabbinic, and so therefore, when we rely upon the signs, it's rabbinic, and so therefore, since it's rabbinic, even though the signs are rabbinic, nevertheless, we can rely upon a sign if it's a siman muvak, if it's a clear sign, if it's a very strong sign, and we're arguing about the nature of these signs. Mar Samar. So that's the opinion. Mar Savar Sivan Muvak. One says that the wart is a Siman Muvak. It's a very clear sign. We can rely upon it. Mar Savar Lav Siman Muvak. And the other Shita, the other approach is that this wart is not a clear sign, and therefore we can't rely upon it. Ask the Gemara, the Amar Rava Siman and Diaraisa. But according to this approach that says that signs are biblical, Akatani, but didn't we say, how can you say the signs are biblical? Didn't we say in our Mishnah, even though there are signs on his body, we can't rely upon it? So the Gemara says, yeah, because those signs that we gave were very shlach, they were not good signs. Gufo, the arach, the goats. He said, yeah, he's a tall guy, he's a short guy. That's not a good sign because it doesn't mean anything. And these are not signs. And they say, oh, he was tall. It doesn't mean anything. What do you mean he was tall? It means something completely different. Also, a lot of people are tall or short. It doesn't mean anything. Or Caleb, and you say, well, no, I know he had a red shirt, and he's there in a red shirt, but maybe he borrowed the red shirt from somebody else. Concerned that maybe he borrowed from somebody. Where it says, you say, oh, you can't use a sign because maybe there's the concern that it was borrowed from somebody else. Chamor b'simani okef. If you have a donkey and you give a sign, but your donkey was lost, and you give the guy who has found the donkey, you give him a sign of your saddle, the donkey saddle. And how can we return it on that basis? And we know that is sufficient because we learned in Bava Metzia in the second chapter that you can return it on the basis of a sign on the saddle. So the Gemara says, well, lo shali inchi ukva. So the mask of no, because people don't, generally speaking, return the saddle because it really is painful for the donkey to use a borrowed saddle. So, but what about the fact that it says about the get? If you found the get tied up in a wallet or with a ring, how could we return it? How are we able to return on that basis? It must be an indication that these signs are reliable. So if you're going to say, so how can you say if signs are rabbinic, how are we going to return it? So the Gemara says, Tabas, because a ring you're not going to lend out to somebody. So therefore you can't have that concern about being borrowed. Because why? Why won't you lend out the ring? Because you're going to be concerned that maybe the person would have if you lend him your ring, he's going to use it for forgery. In Kisva Arniki, Menachash in Shiva Mushli. People will use the wallet for their own sorcery and they're not going to lend it out. And so people are concerned about that, so they won't lend it out. Or else, what's the reason why we're not trusting his simanim as it relates to utensils? He gave bad simanim with respect to this clothing. He said this is a white shirt or a black shirt. That's not enough of a siman. Who doesn't have a white shirt? Everybody has a white shirt. Excuse me. So therefore, it's not sufficient. So we go to the next line of the Mishnah. Even if you saw him amputated, that's not enough to say for sure he's dead. Even if you saw his limbs cut off, that's not enough to say for sure he's dead. So it says the Gemara, the Meguyet Chaya, you mean to say if the guy has his limbs cut off, he's still going to be able to live? There are many, but then we have a contradictory source. We say as follows: Adam Eino Metame Achatetzi Namsho. A person is not going to become Tamei Meis. A person is not going to become ritually impure from the fact that it becomes a dead body. This week's parasha Slukas, talks about the fact. And then when there's a dead body, the dead body becomes an Avos Tuma, father of the fathers of Tuma, and a person who touches that body becomes an Avatuma, father of Tuma. So the person is not going to become Tamei, he's not going to become an Avi Avosa Tuma until a soul departs. Afilu Meguyad v'afilu Goses. Even if he's Meguyad, even if his limbs are cut off, he's still not yet Avi Avosa Tuma. And even if he's a Goses means that he's going to die. You can see from this state that he's going to die. He's just not dead yet. So we see from here that Temuye Lomitame, he's not yet ritually impure, but he's for sure not going to live. So if that's the case, if we see the person as a Meguyad, why can't we assume that he's going to die? So in Babai says, okay, it's a dispute amongst the Tanaim. One is how Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, how Rabbanan. The dispute between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the Rabbana, as we have the Brisa. So what does the Brisa say? Me'idin al Meguyad. According to the Brisa, you're allowed to testify that this person is a Meguyad, that they're going to die, but not if they're Tzoav. So according to the Tanakam of this Brisa, that if the person is indeed has their limbs severed, you could testify that they're going to die. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Afa Meguyad Me'idin Neshayacho Chavos Olochios. Shimon ben Elazar seems to be the author of our Mishnah because he says even if the person is Meguyad, their limbs are severed, you can't testify that they're going to die because it's possible you can cauterize their limbs and then he'll live. So the Gemara says, are you really going to establish the Brisa, the Mishnah like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? Bakatani Seifa, but doesn't the next clause of the Mishnah say, there was an incident in Asia, there was a person who they lowered down into the sea, and after they lowered him into the sea, the only thing they were able to bring up was his leg. They lowered him into the sea. This is the next Mishnah on tomorrow's daf. It says they lowered him down into the sea, and after they lowered him down, they only brought up his leg. And after they brought up his leg, and so the rabbi said that if when they brought him back up, they only found his leg was severed. So if they brought him up, it was severed from the knee upward. Then we're going to say that he for sure get married because he's Meguyad. He die. His limbs are missing. But if it's from the knee downward, can't get married. So we see from here that since presumably both Mishnahs are written by the same author, and in the concluding clause it says that even though his limbs are severed, when his limbs are severed, he's for sure going to die. So it's inconsistent with Rabbi Shimon Elazar's position, because Rabbi Shimon Elazar says you can live when your limbs are severed. So the Gemara says, no, Shani, that case is different. Shani Maya de Marazu Maka. The water is different because water causes the wound to exacerbates the wound. And so therefore, even Rabbi Shimon Elazar would say he'll die if he loses his limbs in the water. Gemara says, but really, but really, he has a question on Rabbi Shimon Elazar. He says, how can you say if his limbs are cut, he could still live? But there was once I saw an Arab that he took a sword, he chopped up a camel, and the camel, when it lost its legs, it didn't even have time to bray before it died. That was a very weak camel. That's Abaye's answer. And Rabbi Amar Besakim Ubenes he says, no, that was a very hot knife. And everybody would say, even Rabbi Shimon Elazar would say, if it's a very hot knife, the animal's for sure not going to live. And let's say you see a wild animal eating him, you can't assume that he's dead yet. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul Shana Min Makom Sheinav Sheyotzi. That's if you see it's eating his leg or something in the place where you don't die from. Min Makom Sheinav Sheyotzi. But if he's eating him from a place where you die, i.e., let's say the heart, then indeed we can testify that he's dead. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul. And so now we're going back to a statement. Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul says that, and this is we learned in Gittin. Shachat bo shnayim or shnayim uparach. Let's say this man had a wound in the east, and it was slaughtered. He has two pipes, the trachea and the esophagus, and if both of them are cut, or even just the majority of both, the ramas, and then the man gives a sign, he gives a hint, and he says, "Kisfu gel ishti," and he writes. And he says, write a get for my wife before I die, so my wife doesn't have to do yibum with my brother. Then that's enough. He's still alive, enough to them to write the get. So chayu the sofa lamos. So the Gemara's answer is, yeah, he's going to die. If he's going to die under those circumstances, even though because it's a place from where his life is being cut, the trachea and the esophagus. But nevertheless, he's still at that moment alive. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if he's still alive, but he's going to die, me'ata go al yado, send the person who does this accidentally to him into exile as an accidental killer. Alamatanya, why do we learn shachat shnaim arov shnaim areza enogola? Why do we learn that such a person does not go into exile if he kills such a person? Mar says, because so we said, yeah, we explained the reason why he doesn't go into exile. Rav Hoshaya says, because we're concerned maybe the wind is the what that will, he didn't do the direct action to cause him to death because he cut the trachea and esophagus, but the wind then exacerbated. Inami iu kireg misaso, or maybe alternatively, the person himself causes hastened his death by thrashing around. The Ma'ibinayo, what's the distinction? The shachte bebesa, the shisha. Let's say you attacked him, you hurt him in a house where there was no wind, upirches, and then he did the death rattle. So there was the thrashing that caused him to die, and not the wind. Or inami de shachte bebarav uparches, or maybe you did this to him outside, and he didn't do the death, the thrashing. So those are some possible distinctions. Rabbi Yehuda says not all places are the same, that the body decomposes differently. You don't necessarily have to wait 3 days, or maybe you have to wait more than 3 days. So that's what the Gemara asks. Is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava being strict when he says not all the places are the same. So maybe even after less than 3 days, you can't identify the body. Or maybe he's being lenient, and maybe he's saying even after 3 days you can still testify. There was a person who died in Karmi. It was a place, Rashi says. I don't know if it's Rashi, but elsewhere Rashi says it. And so what did they do? This person died, and they brought him up to they brought him up to this place called Hedja, and Labasar Twas and Yom, and then they brought him up after 3 days. Rav Dimi allowed, even though it's after 3 days, he allowed allowed his wife to remarry. There was another person who died in the Diglas River. Agishra Deshavistana, and they brought him up on this bridge, and it was after 3 days. And Rabbi allowed his wife to get married on the basis of the people who testified after 3 days. So we see from here that you can be lenient after that period of time. So if you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba is being lenient, if that's what you want to say, well, in Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, in these cases where they relied upon it even after 3 days, they're ruling like Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. But if you say Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba is being strict, well, who are they holding like? So Gemara says, well, Shani Maya did Samti. So no, water is different. You don't have to say they're holding like Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba allows it even after 3 days. You could say water is different. It's Samti. It causes everything to contract and preserves it more. Gemara says, Amras Maya Marzum Mata. But then we just say on the previous daf on Kuf Chaf Amabeis that water exacerbates the wound. So the Gemara says, yeah, if there's a wound, but if there's no wound, the water caused the body to be preserved, to contract. And that's also only the case that which we said this, that the water causes it to be preserved, but not after. But so even if you see him after 3 days, that's only if when you brought him up from the water, the witnesses saw him right away. Avo ishtai, but if the witnesses did not see him right away, then mitbach tapach. Then you can't testify about him, because then it's possible that he got swollen, and so therefore his appearance changed. Okay, we'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.